This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Boz Digital Labs, and JZ Microphones. So get ready to rock.
You know, I just like space. I like having the room. Ideally, you're in a room that sounds good, that you're recording in. Being able to play with the distance to the instrument so that you're getting more of the ambience of the room with the mics without having to add a second room pair. To me, that it just adds another level of realism to the recording so that you're not hearing this direct thing that you either have to affect later. It's just direct sounding.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. This episode is sponsored by OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, your trusted source for memory and speed upgrades, DIY installs, and used Macs for your studio. Let OWC focus on keeping your studio Mac in killer condition so that you can focus on making great music. Why ditch your existing Mac when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and learn how you can supercharge your studio Mac. The speed to create, the capacity to dream. Now find out how awesome your studio can be at OWC. This episode is sponsored by Boz Digital Labs, offering you the coolest plugins for your mixes like the Hoser XT and Plus 10 dB Signature Series. You can transform your drums with Sasquatch Kick Machine or Transgressor, get massive bass with Big Clipper, or add width and depth using Mongoose and Imperial Delay. All Boz Digital Labs plugins are available as fully functioning, no time limit free trials, so you can check them out on your mixes right now. Just go to bozdigitallabs.com or click the link in the show notes of this episode. This episode is sponsored by JZ Microphones with the unique Golden Drop capsule design. The Black Hole Series BH1S and BH2 microphones with the hole in the middle for a one-of-a-kind shock mount combine innovative industrial design with careful craftsmanship to bring a world-class sound to your studio, resulting in a level of quality and detail in your recordings that you won't find in other mics. Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTAR right now to get an incredible 50% off. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Brandon Bell, a Grammy-winning recording engineer known for his work with bluegrass, Americana, and country music artists. Originally from Central Arkansas, Brandon moved to Tennessee to study recording at Middle Tennessee State University, same place I went to school. He got his start after that interning for and later assisting renowned recording engineer and producer Gary Pachoza. With Gary, he was twice nominated for the Best Engineered Non-Classical Grammy for Alan Jackson's Like Red on a Rose and Sarah Jarosz's Bluegrass album, Follow Me Down. Brandon later received a Grammy in 2013 for Best Bluegrass Album for his work on the Steep Canyon Rangers album, Nobody Knows You. His other credits at the time include Earl Scruggs, Alison Krauss and Union Station, Chris Thile, Darrell Scott, Dierks Bentley, and Blackberry Smoke. And in 2014, Brandon was hired to be studio manager and chief engineer at Southern Ground Nashville, a beautiful Nashville recording studio owned by Zac Brown. Brandon has expanded into production with artists like Sam Lewis, and he also enjoys working with producer Dave Cobb on records for Robert Randolph, Dylan Leblanc, Dillon Carmichael, Anderson East, Brent Cobb, William Prince, Chris Isaak, and John Prine. And throughout his career, Brandon has been fortunate to work with many talented artists, musicians, engineers, and producers. In Brandon's own words, the best part of the job continues to be that moment when you know you've captured on tape precisely what the artist was trying to communicate. When what you've recorded is meaningful and can be shared with those outside of the studio walls. Recording music of any genre is equal parts art and science, as it should be. Also, I want to give a shout out to Mark Rubel once again for introducing Brandon and I. Mark's been awesome at bringing on great guests onto this podcast. So thanks for that, Mark. Please welcome Brandon Bell to Recording Studio Rockstars. Brandon, are you ready to rock, dude?
Yeah, man. Let's do it.
Great to have you here, man.
Man, it's great to be here. Such a cool spot.
Thanks very much. You are working out of a beautiful studio, man. Southern Ground. We were talking about this before the podcast, but I remember going over there when it was Masterlink.
Yeah,
I believe it was
Masterlink,
called,
right?
Yeah, before you guys kind of transformed it into this wonderful place. But what a beautiful place, man.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, every day it's an inspiring place to work. No matter what the artist or what style of music you're working with, whether it's a studio session band or, just a rock band bringing in all their own stuff. It's just it's an adventure every day and I love it.
Yeah, nice. Well, tell us a little bit more about who you are. I mean, so we're fellow alum from MTSU.
Yeah, right.
Awesome.
I grew up in Arkansas and a small town and kind of went through the ranks, I guess, of just learning different instruments as a kid, trying to figure out how to make instruments make sounds and make them do what you want them to do on a certain level, kind of playing guitar, bass, and drums. And then
were you doing some recording too while you were learning music?
Had between a buddy of mine and I, the two of us had a band. We would play all the instruments and kind of multi-track the thing with a little 4-track Porta Studio or whatever it was.
Starting out on tape.
I think we wore out a couple of those things over the course of 3 or 4 years, but bouncing stuff back and forth from cassettes and any way we could figure out how to do it. But yeah, I went to college as a music major initially at UCA, University of Central Arkansas, and was quickly learned that it was a lot deeper than I had realized as far as the musicianship of professionals.
Yeah.
So I kind of bailed off of the music major path.
Oh, right. So you were studying to be the musician first.
Yeah, that was kind of somehow in high school, I had this dream of being a studio player. And I really didn't know what that meant. I just knew I liked playing music and could generally pick up things relatively quickly, I guess.
That's impressive. I didn't even know that studio players existed when
right.
I was starting out. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I forget. I think there was a guy that I worked at a motorcycle shop with that played bass on some gospel records. And he had kind of made mention of like these session guys. I was like, wow, this is amazing. And he actually kind of took us into a small studio out near our hometown and got to sit in and eventually got to play on some stuff while I was still in high school. And it was just amazing, even though it wasn't by any standard any kind of music that I really wanted to have anything to do with at the time, it was still pretty dang awesome to be in the
and
studio.
you got to see locally, you got to see the inside of what was a real recording studio.
Yeah. I mean, it was the space was pretty well built. The equipment was fairly pedestrian. At that point, we were all just geeking out about 16-track Mackeys anyway. So to have a studio that had it was like a digital 8-bus or some version of a Mackie as the front end, that just seemed like heaven.
Yeah.
Now looking back on that, it's a little bit comical, but even just goes to show that you can even make cool sounds and records with even that kind of a setup. So
hey, I still believe in the fact that the most important thing about making music and making records is that it's exciting and fun. Because I mean, what else are you left with in the process?
Right. Right. I mean, it took me a long time to really figure it out. As a kid growing up, looking at gear and looking through catalogs and just kind of lusting after stuff. You feel like that's the magic silver bullet of the whole thing. It's like, once I get this piece, I'll be able to make these great sounds. And and man, it being a really hard lesson that's really not how it works. Kind of coming to the realization that if you have somebody that can convey the right emotion, be it with their voice or an instrument or whatever, the gear is, less than 5% of the whole equation or something, if you really want to break it down to a number. Just the evidence and listening to a bunch of records, there's great records that have been made with 57s and a 4-track, and there's terrible records that have been made with a 251 and, the greatest, like Stevens Tape Machine or whatever, Pro Tools, whatever you think is the most, best sounding setup. So just really trying to break it down to the most basic form of excitement and energy.
So you came to Nashville, went to MTSU, did the whole recording program there. What are some hindsight takeaways for you about the whole recording school experience? If you were going to pass on a message to somebody who's wondering about recording school, what were the things that you really learned there? What were the things that, you didn't learn until you were out of school working in music itself?
Yeah. The schools, there's so many of them now, for better or for worse. But I feel like they're all similar in the way that you really get out of them what you put into them. So if that's your path, if that's what you want to do, you really have to fully commit yourself to that program. So showing up, at the studio, even when you don't have booked studio time, just being a fly on the wall, watching other people work, figuring out the social aspect of it, because some people don't want to be helped. Some people are really trying to figure things out on their own and don't want you to jump in. But learning a tactful way to say, hey, if you need anything or want anything, I'd love to help any way I can, or just finding a way to jump in if you know how to help out. That's always a helpful skill to learn.
Do you remember people in school being really into different styles of music too? Like,
oh man,
you kind of go after learning the kind of music that you're really into.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up listening to kind of blues and classic rock was what I listened to and loved. So that was my background. But coming into school, I started seeing all kinds of crazy stuff that I'd never really experienced before, being from a small town in Arkansas. I mean, we didn't really hear of Nirvana until after Kurt Cobain had already died.
Wow.
I mean, it just took a little bit of time to get there.
That's great.
So,
what about the Grateful Dead? Did you know about the Grateful Dead though?
Loosely aware, but it wasn't something I was really into. I mean,
what was the band that you remember really being a big fan of back then?
I mean, then and still to this day, it'd be Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin.
Okay,
I mean,
right,
I just wore all of those records out.
It's classic rock.
Yeah. Of course, the Beatles. My dad was a huge Beatles fan. We listened to Abbey Road probably more than any other record growing up. We were working on cars in the garage or whatever. We were listening to Abbey Road.
That's awesome.
Occasionally Revolver, but mostly Abbey Road.
Nice.
But yeah, I mean, and just seeing all the different styles of music at school and diving into records that, I mean, I just wanted to listen to stuff that was made in Nashville to see. I was trying to figure out what the internship would be. Like, if I were to do that, who would I want to work with? Where would I want to be if I had a say in it? So, I started diving through records, and bluegrass kept coming up for whatever reason. Somebody had told me when I was in high school that I really needed to check out Alison Krauss and Union Station, and that, they were still pretty young at that point. But I finally did when I moved to Nashville, and dang, those records just sound so good, and I kept coming back to that. I wasn't necessarily a fan of bluegrass, but just from a sonic standpoint, Alison Krauss's Forget About It record. Dang. I mean,
is it now those records that Gary Pachosa recorded?
Yeah, so Gary recorded all of those, and Alison produced a fair amount. I think Pat Bergeson produced the Forget About It record. But I mean, that record in particular, the musicianship, the songs, the performances, sounds, everything is just so on point.
Yeah. Alison has this incredible laser beam pitch singing voice too. Just angelic, pure tone.
I don't know why it didn't really catch me on the recording so much, but she sings so incredibly quietly. It's very soft.
Really?
Very soft. Like, at some points I just feel like, how is anything even coming out of her body? Because it's just so soft. But that's how she really, she just has such an amazing connection with the emotional part of the song, which, I mean, that's to me the most important thing happening with any song, especially if it's kind of sad or whatever.
Yeah. And then I know she'll sing and play violin too. Is her violin playing sort of a matched volume to the vocal level, or is it like singing is quiet, the fiddle's maybe a little louder? Do you remember any of that?
I feel like fiddle is a little bit louder, but she, even compared to other fiddle players, I feel like she plays softer. I mean, she just has an amazing touch and feel for her instrument, whether it's the violin or her voice. She just understands it on this extremely fundamental level better than anybody I've ever heard, I think.
Yeah. I've worked with Victor Krauss, her brother, and, he was talking about those guys growing up in, I guess, just south of Chicago, and I was just curious, here's a couple of people who just have brilliant musical abilities, and I was sort of curious where that comes from. And, just stories about taking piano lessons when they were 5 years old or whatever, and just having a lot of music around the house.
I think they listen to a lot of Def Leppard, from what I gather.
That's great. All right, cool. So, talk a little bit about your first experiences with Gary. You did the recording school thing. What were some of the things you learned that you didn't learn in school, where you were like, oh, they didn't teach me about this in recording school?
Yeah, man, specific examples would be difficult. I mean, there were some basics that I don't think about a lot anymore because it's all kind of second nature. But like reading a chart was pretty helpful just to have a basic understanding of what it looks like, what the numbers do, not necessarily understanding the pitches and the differences and why they're, hearing the difference between a 1 and a 5 or whatever. I feel it. I know that, I knew the difference at that point, but walking into a session and immediately having to follow the chart and drop session markers or write tape times on the chart so you knew where to rewind, or the assistant knew where to rewind to.
Right, because at that point, we weren't all Pro Tools necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of, even then, there were a couple studios where Pro Tools was an extra rental. You had a radar system in the room, and that was what you got to work on unless you paid the extra rental for Pro Tools, which now just seems ridiculous. Now
you pay the extra rental for the tape machine.
Right. Yeah. So, having basic understandings of chart reading, basic studio etiquette. I had a pretty good foundation of Pro Tools editing because even before I was in college, I was a dialogue editor for a radio program.
Oh, cool.
So a syndicated radio program out of Little Rock. So I did a fair amount of editing on like Pro Tools 4 or 5 or whatever it was.
Yeah. Back when editing was for real men and women.
But, I feel like even today that I probably learned 95% of what I do on a daily basis doing it. Yeah. Learning from Gary, learning from other people, paying attention to what's happening in the studio, trying to figure out what works, what doesn't.
Let me ask you more about charts for just a sec, because I like to dig into the some of these basics too. When you're doing sessions, is it pretty routine for somebody to come in and have charts for musicians and to hand you as the engineer a chart as well?
Yeah, I mean, typically.
Or do we have to ask for, hey, you guys mind if I have a chart too?
It depends. Sometimes people are just flying and don't think about it. And other times, most cases, the band's writing the chart in the studio, right? Kind of on the fly anyway.
Sort of hearing. I've seen, examples where somebody plays a recording of the demo of the song and then the band's sitting and then they write the chart and then that gets copied. Somebody goes to the copier at that point, right?
Yeah, right. And that's usually the engineer, the assistant, kind of whoever's available. So the assistants all kind of know to toss a chart on the console. So
what is the value of a chart for an engineer? If you don't have to play the chords, why do you want to have a chart?
Positional reference, you know where that, just speed and efficiency in the session is kind of critical to knowing where you're at on the chart. So,
do you remember the kind of conversations that we used to have before we had a chart in front of us where we were trying to, do you remember there was that short part that happened before that other part and somewhere in the middle of the song?
Right before the meadlies. Go before the meadlies.
Right before the meadlies. It's always interesting to me the way that you understand a song. The nice thing about a chart is even if it was just a bunch of boxes drawn on a piece of paper, at least you'd be like, let's go to the third box, or something like that. But before that, you listen to somebody who's focused on the lyrics talk about the song, and they have a totally different understanding of when something begins and ends, or what part of the song you're in, versus somebody who's thinking about the different chords.
Yeah, are we talking about a lyrical line or a chord chart line,
Yeah.
Line 3
or
of the song
drummer.
could
It's
be
like
two
it's on the
different things.
one or whatever,
Yeah, right.
So, so Rockstars, I encourage you to come up with any kind of chart you can think about, just so that everybody has a common language for talking about the song session. You'll save a lot of time, right?
I mean, the Nashville number system really does work well. Its shining glory, I suppose, is the fact that you can kind of transpose the song into any key, and the chart remains relevant through every change. So, there's plenty of resources on YouTube and all around for the Nashville number system.
So it's interesting because the number system being an ability to change the key is always like the classic story of charts, but like so rarely do we ever change the damn key on the session.
Right.
We don't really change the key that much. But what it was interesting for me is that really when you see a song laid out in chart form and you're like, that's a 6 minor, that's a 2 minor. I think it helps your brain like understand more and more and more how to understand the chord progressions. Whereas if it's all just chord letters, you can do that. You can understand it too, but it doesn't, as soon as it's in a different key, it's not as obvious.
Yeah, right.
Cool. All right. Well, enough about charts. So stuff with Gary, Lex Price is somebody that I've worked with here in the past. And he had a interesting thing to say about Gary once, where he said that he's like, Gary really loves the AKG 451. And I was curious about that. What were some things that you learned working with Gary about, recording instruments, getting great sounds? Does he love the AKG 451? Any stories?
I don't know that I would say he loves it. I don't know if he loves any mic. Maybe he does. I don't know. KM54 is pretty special. That's the, Neumann small diaphragm tube mic that's got an AC701 K-tube circuit and just beautifully natural top end on anything. Put it in front of any source and it's going to sound pretty dang great.
Yeah.
But I mean,
and also just to ask this question, you've probably had some great experience on a wide variety of microphones at this point. I know you do a lot of acoustical instrument recordings, and so you really know what things sound like. Have you discovered some modern, when we hear stories about old vintage mics, although I don't know if the KM54 is made by Neumann now or not, but I imagine it's an older one.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're like, oh man, so there must not be that many out there, or I don't know. Have you discovered some new mics that you got real excited about that sort of have some of these qualities as well? Anybody that you've been digging on lately that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah. I don't know. The KM54 thing is really difficult to nail because of I guess the nickel capsules are difficult to make. Expensive, maybe.
Oh, okay, all right.
And there's really something special, I think, about the nickel more than the tube circuit and whatever. But I know there's a lot of people that are really making strong strides in building something that's in that vein, and I'm sure there's great options. I just don't.
Yeah. All right, digging.
I don't dig down that.
Yeah, but that was some cool insights. See, I didn't know anything about nickel capsules.
Yeah, I mean, from the on the large diaphragm side of things, we've got that Upton 251. And I mean, blindly, he tuned it and it sounds like a matched Paratara vintage 251.
Wow.
I mean, it's ridiculous how close they sound to each other.
And what's the story with Upton? Is that
so
local?
Upton is the Dallas Upton is the builder, the owner of the company. He also does Vintech audio. And he just felt like he could do it. He's kind of one of those guys that is incredibly bright and with this, can-do attitude and engineering background, I guess, that he just felt like it was possible to recreate something like that. And he machines everything in-house.
Where are those guys? Are they out
I think they're
West Coast or something?
Where are they? Like Fort Lauderdale or Tallahassee or something. It's kind of northern Florida somewhere, I think.
Dig it. I like Florida. It's warm down there.
Lovely. Maybe there's some sun. We haven't had a lot of that here.
Yeah, I know. We really haven't had a cold winter in Nashville, though. I think we got a dusting of snow once.
It's been pretty light.
Like that.
But, but Dallas builds incredible stuff. I mean, the Vintech stuff is all incredibly usable and very much like the Neve that they're kind of shooting for. rock solid builds.
I remember the Vintech stuff sort of, for me, first appearing on the scene probably like 2000s or something like that, you know? And it was like, you know, it was one of those early, or one of the first companies that I was aware of that was making replicas of other kinds of you know, classic Neve mic pre's and things like that.
Right.
And it's like, hey, you can afford to get something that's a rack and sounds great.
And works. Drag. I mean, we had a few of those Vintech pre's with Gary, and we drug those things all over the place and never had an issue. Just rock solid.
Yeah. Cool.
You know,
cool.
so on the newer side of things, he's building stuff that's perfectly on par with the vintage counterpart, you know, and I know there's more than just him, but
cool. Well, I always like to just ask questions like that because, you know, we just accumulate these different little bits of knowledge about mics and gear and stuff to check out. So I know there's a lot of cool things out there. I mean, we live in a time now where there is just an abundance of great recording gear.
Yeah. It's remarkable.
It's like, there wasn't that many choices really, you know, back in the past, but now it's like there's so many microphone companies and mic preamps.
Yeah, the 500 series stuff is just kind of off the charts.
Yeah, pretty exciting. So I guess a good takeaway is you don't have to worry about knowing all of them and having all of them. You really just need some that are pretty good. Right?
I mean, I believe in finding stuff that you like the way they sound. I mean, and just being able to trust your equipment. That's such a huge part of it. Just knowing that, I mean, that was the thing with the Vintex. It's like, it didn't matter where we put those in the car and drug them to, me dragging them in out of the car or whatever. Everywhere we took them, they were going to sound exactly like we expected them to.
Yeah.
Same with whatever mics we were taking around. Like, everything kind of had a purpose in the way that, you know, we trusted what they sounded like. We knew what they were supposed to do. And you put them up in front of any instrument, immediately you know if there's something wrong with the instrument or something wrong with the equipment.
This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can go to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level. And you can start right now with my free introduction to mixing course, Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is that these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you are in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, or look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So what were some of the those sessions that you remember doing with Gary when you were starting out, though?
Man, some of the more fun ones were, you know, going out of town for a project. You know, we would go to Asheville to Echo Mountain for a couple records. We did a Dierks Bentley record there that I think didn't get released. We did a
record.
It's a practice record.
I've done those.
That's
I've spent a year working on a practice record before.
Yeah, it was a really fun practice record. We had a really great time and created some really amazing music.
It's entirely possible that we might have even spent $500,000 on a practice record before.
Very possible. We recorded the Steep Canyon Rangers record out there. We did a Steve Martin record with Steep Canyon Rangers there in Asheville that we actually got to record Paul McCartney on, which was pretty ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you've recorded Paul McCartney?
Yeah.
No way, dude.
And it was...
Tell that story.
It's the craziest thing that's probably ever happened. But yeah, so we're you know, at Echo Mountain in their Studio A. I forget what this was, 2009 or 10 maybe.
This is probably when he came to play Bonnaroo too, same... Or maybe that was a little
McCartney
later. I think McCartney was actually later than that.
Yeah, I'm not sure. But you know, we were set up at the studio in Asheville, and Steve had a couple guest vocals already in mind for a couple of the songs. Like, I think the Dixie Chicks were already lined up to sing on one of the songs, and I'm not sure if this song just came to the table late or he was just kind of still trying to figure out who should sing it. And Tony Trischka and Gary were kind of co-producing, I think. And Tony just said, hey, you know, maybe it's kind of a silly love song. Maybe we should just throw it out there to McCartney's people and see what happens. And Steve was like, I don't know him. You know, I don't know how to get in touch with him. And Tony was like, well, but you know other people that probably do. So that kind of got the ball rolling, and he started emailing people like Lorne Michaels and whatever, and totally hooked it up. And
Awesome.
within probably a couple hours, he was in direct communication with McCartney about singing on this song. So this was like early in the week. We had kind of saved the Friday of that week as the banjo overdub day to kind of do whatever repairs we needed for the whole record, and then pack up and go home. And so by Tuesday, we knew we weren't going to need Friday for the repairs day, or, whatever we had kind of set it aside for. Steve had kind of set it up with Paul. Paul just said, I'm in, I'll do it, but I'm not in a place that I can just come to Asheville.
Right.
So you got to come to me if you can do that. Which, Steve was like, if you're in, we're going to find a way to make it work. So that kind of started this crazy conversation of like, helicopters landing on tops of buildings in New York to get him to a studio, all kinds of crazy stuff that probably wouldn't have happened realistically, but we had those conversations anyways. And what we ended up doing, Thursday night, we wrapped up recording. We packed all of our gear into Gary's car, and we woke up early Friday morning, went to the Asheville airport, and got on a private charter and flew to East Hampton, New York.
Wow.
And there was a car. We scoured all of the Hamptons for a studio, and we found a studio, some lady that does a lot of like Broadway voiceover stuff. It was a home studio. And
you just needed to record one voice.
We just needed one voice. So it was kind of, wasn't necessarily ideal, but it was enough to do the job for sure. And so we set this thing up. We had somebody come and cook lunch for us while we were there getting set up. And Paul came in he came in straight from the beach with his kids. He had just shorts on and had his guitar in one hand and like an egg sandwich and foil in the other hand. And that was it. Like no people, no posse, no manager, just Paul McCartney came in the door and
that's so cool.
Tuned his guitar up, told a couple jokes, shook everybody's hand, said, hey. And I mean, it was just, otherworldly. I mean, it was just incredibly bizarre and crazy.
And so you were on the talkback going, excuse me, Mr. McCartney.
Could you get a little closer to the mic?
Oh, no.
No, I mean, he was a total pro. And
did you accidentally blast him with feedback in his headphones?
Thank God, no. No, the biggest thing for me was trying to figure out as quickly as I possibly could what his cue point would be. Like every time we were punching a spot, like how much pre-roll did I need to give him?
Right.
Because he was fairly particular about that.
Yeah.
Like he wanted enough to be able to get into the role, but not too much that he's just in there hanging out.
Dude, I was just trying to teach my interns about that here. It's so funny how like before you get that, you don't necessarily get that. I mean, at this point, I think you already knew what that was all about. You're just like trying to make it perfect for Paul McCartney.
Right.
But still, I talk about that for a second. What does it mean to get the pre-roll right? Some people are like, who are doing this for the first time, they just have no clue.
I find that it's not different on every session, but like the typical Nashville session where you've got session players on the floor, those guys just kind of expect 2 bars, that you just give them 2 bars. And if you're on a click, that's super easy. Right.
So just two bars means 2 bars of music playing just before you punch into record, and it's time to perform whatever is being fixed.
Right. So that's kind of the norm, and they kind of get annoyed if there's more. They run with it if there's less. They're all so good that they just kind of make it work.
And as a musician yourself, what is the experience of having the wrong pre-roll feel like?
Just if it's too short, it's a little jarring to be able to jump right in with the song, with the music.
Right. You're like not even, your brain isn't even in the song yet.
Right. Yeah. You haven't, your clock hasn't caught up with the beat of the music. And if it's too long, I guess there's the possibility of being distracted or, getting bored.
If I'm the one on the guitar, it's a big possibility.
Yeah.
So anyway, thanks for breaking that down. So Rockstar's pre-roll is really important. It's got to be right.
Yeah. And, he was also singing in a tiny little closet that had no real AC, so it was kind of getting hot in there. And we're all very aware of his time and didn't want to waste any. So we were really just trying to crank through stuff. And, we got, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 takes that all felt pretty good. And we said, man, we've got what we need. We're all set. And he said, no, we're just getting started. He said, we're really going to, if we're going to do this, let's do it right.
Yeah.
He didn't say those words exactly, but
he likes to drive the bus.
I'm sure he threw in some Beatles song as a joke or quote or something that's pretty funny at the time. But, he really worked hard on that song and really developed the character, which was really amazing to see. I mean, forget that it's Paul McCartney, just a person that you've said, hey, we've got what we want, and they want to keep going because they know that they're still developing this thing and learning the emotion of the song, learning the timing or the cadence of everything that's happening. But it's Paul McCartney. So, he really honed in this part over the course of, I think we probably worked in there for 2.5 hours or something, just really honing this thing in. And it's incredible. It was really amazing to see and witness.
Did you consider selling the outtakes on the black market? On the deep web?
We pretty much set them on fire.
Burn them. Take them out to the yard and.
Yeah, there was some amazing stuff. Just man.
All right, so of course everybody wants to know, what mic did you use to record Paul McCartney's voice?
So we took 2, kind of have a backup just in case. Since we were flying with all of our gear, we took our Mastering Lab tube pre's GML EQ GML compressor. So we had a stereo path for both, a path for each mic basically, and then we had a blue bottle with a B6 capsule, I think, and a Telefunken 251 that Echo Mountain was kind enough to loan us. So we put both of those up and took both of them. I can't remember which made the record, but they both sounded great. They both sounded amazing. That's
cool. I'm sure if you have a mic and you're like, this mic can now be said to have recorded Paul McCartney, you send it right off.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. Yeah. What a trip. What an awesome story. And then you guys were done with that and then you just go hit the beach?
Yeah, we finished that. We went back to the airport, got on the plane, flew back to Asheville. I got in the truck full of gear and I drove all the way back to Nashville.
Nice, man.
It was the most surreal day, I think. Yeah.
Oh, that was all in one day?
That was all in one day.
Wow. Holy crap. Yeah. All right. Well, so share some other recording techniques that you remember learning in that sort of stage of recording, working with Gary and stuff, and we're going to move forward from there. But what were some of the ways of recording like acoustic guitar that you remember learning about and being a new discovery for you?
Not to give away all Gary's secrets, but recording most things.
Give away like 99% of them.
Right. Mostly being stereo recording. Every instrument is kind of recorded in some version of a stereo setup.
Okay, that's fascinating. What does that even mean? Like, where do we even begin to grasp the concept of having our instruments be stereo?
I mean, got 2 ears.
True.
Typically listening on 2 speakers, so it seems to make sense.
What are some of the ways that you would record stereo?
Trying to figure out what makes the most sense for the song. But guitar, instead of doing a wide left and right thing, sometimes it would be a top and bottom thing.
Okay, so a mic sort of above the acoustic and a mic below the acoustic?
Yeah.
And then those might be panned out left and right to make a stereo image?
They might be, and sometimes they might not. Depending, you could always vary the width of it, which was always kind of the nice thing about having the stereo field of the instrument, is being able to, manipulate the width and size after the fact if you wanted to.
Yeah, because I guess if you're recording acoustic and a voice, it can feel very mono if you're just like, well, I got one mic on the acoustic, one mic on the voice, right?
Right. Yeah, totally.
All right, so let's keep digging into that. Some other ways that you enjoy recording stereo mics on acoustic guitar.
I just like space. I like having the room. So ideally, you're in a room that sounds good that you're recording in.
Yeah.
So having space, and this isn't necessarily a Gary thing, but being able to play with the distance to the instrument so that you're getting more of the ambience of the room with the mics without having to add a second room pair. To me, that it just adds another level of realism to the recording, so that you're not hearing this direct thing that you either have to affect later, or I don't know, just, it's just direct sounding. It's very
kind of like recording a drum set. If it's too many close mics, then it doesn't feel real later, and you have to sort of make it feel real somehow.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I really enjoy using the space as much as I can. I mean, sometimes everything is kind of situational. So, like a lot of the recordings I do now, it's a lot of live in the room stuff,
right?
And you kind of have to balance the distance from the artist trying to gather the space versus, I've got drums in the room or electric guitars, or there's another acoustic player, upright bass. So you're really trying to take all those factors into consideration so that you're just close enough or just far away enough that you're getting enough of the ambience of each player, but also enough that their signal is overpowering all the others in the room.
Right.
And I find ribbon mics to be really helpful in a lot of that.
They get great rejection on the sides, right?
Yeah, really great rejection on the sides. And I mean, it's another thing that I'm almost embarrassed that it took so long to figure out, but how much more even a figure 8 ribbon rejects from the backside or rejects the room than like a U67 or, any kind of condenser mic.
So a condenser mic that's doing figure 8 is going to pick up a whole lot much more of the room than a ribbon mic doing a figure 8.
Right. Or, I mean, I've done recordings where I had a U67 up that's in cardioid and a figure 8, like an R88 for a vocal, just one side of the R88. And then thinking I've got the R88 for vibe and maybe I get to use it. But then getting into mix and listening to both and really A-Bing and realizing that the R88 has almost no room. Like ribbon mics, I guess, just physically, when you're pushing on one side, they have to kind of ignore the backside a little bit, unless the backside is louder than the front side.
Interesting.
So it's a really cool thing to do. And when you've got a room full of players, as long as the louder thing is closest to the mic that you're trying to capture with that mic, it kind of makes sense to put up a ribbon.
Well, so I think about, classic recordings where you have a full band in a room and a singer in a room and everything, and you're always seeing pictures of ribbon mics. Maybe it was because condenser mics weren't prevalent back then.
Right.
But it's certainly the ribbon mics worked for those recordings. And then I also think about our guest, John Cuniberti, doing his one mic series where he's using the stereo AEA mic, ribbon mic, to do that and actually capture a band all in a room.
Yeah.
And it probably makes sense that, like, trying to do that with a stereo figure 8 condenser mic, the room might be just too loud and splashy compared to doing it with a ribbon.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I just love the way ribbons react. The high frequency thing, you can always add top and it just sounds so natural. Versus a condenser can sometimes sound hard or not natural. Like there's too much of something, too much sizzle or something that's happening that just doesn't happen with a ribbon mic.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder when somebody's going to invent a human ear mic. Ooh, that sounds weird. It sounds creepy. I mean, think about it in a good way, whatever that means. All right. So, I waited a minute here, but I like to ask guests to share an inspirational quote to kick off the show too. You got anything that you want to share with us to kind of get us excited about hitting the studio?
Man, inspirational quote.
Or anybody that's inspired you in recording and producing yourself?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you never know who you're going to run into, who you're going to work for or work with. But to just be excited about doing it. I mean, I don't know. I'm not.
Just have fun.
Yeah, you got to have fun with it. If you, like Cowboy Jack said, we're in the fun business. So if we're not having fun, we're not doing it right. We're not doing our jobs.
I feel like that's something I try to say on the podcast in some other way, but the idea of just having fun, enjoy it. Because I remember, like, you're talking about the 4-track stuff in the beginning.
Yeah.
And I remember that, my experience of some of the shittiest sounding recordings I've ever done in my life with some of the worst playing and the worst sounding instruments, was extremely fun because it was like that first experience of doing stuff. And I'll take that all the time, man.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just want it to be a lot of fun to do.
It can be exciting. I don't know. It's always weird calling yourself an engineer and feeling the way I do about sonic things the way I do. Like, I want it to sound good.
Yeah.
I mean, I always want it to sound good, but also understanding that ultimately, if it doesn't feel good, if it doesn't translate some kind of fun or sad or some human emotion, that it doesn't matter. It can be the greatest sounding whatever, but if it doesn't make somebody feel something, then what's the point?
Right. You're not going to want to listen to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and having fun with, you can have fun with the sad recording. You can still try affecting things differently and trying to I feel like my job as an engineer, I'm starting to figure it out.
Yeah. I know,
after
I know
whatever,
feeling.
15, 16 years, but understanding it more as an emotional role than just making stuff sound nice.
Right.
So trying to figure out what the artist was going for in tracking why they wrote the song, and then figure out what it is that I can do to help support that or improve upon it or, enhance it. So that to me has been the biggest lesson. And I think completely differently when I mix than, just trying to make, you go down all these crazy wormholes of trying to make stuff sound better or whatever. And at the end of the day, it's not that important on some level.
Yeah. It's like the sound quality is important, but only in its ability to help communicate the emotion of whatever the message of the song is.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. So, if something's distorted, sometimes that's a good thing.
Sometimes it's a great thing.
Exactly.
Sometimes I finally remember to put distortion on things. And later I'm like, oh my God, this is the best sounding track that we did.
Yeah. Sometimes, you running through a tape machine or a cassette deck or whatever for a slap delay or just the color. You get hiss, you get things that are ugly that maybe aren't ideal, but maybe it's just the right thing to help get where you want to go, So try not to feel bad about that.
No, don't feel bad about it. Feel good. Enjoy yourself. And what was the words of Viv Savage in Spinal Tap? Have a good time all the time. That was this advice. All right, hey, Rockstars, we're going to take a break now. We'll come back in for the jam session. A reminder that we'll have links to stuff we're talking about in the show notes here with Brandon, including a YouTube playlist you can click on. And I think you have a Spotify link that'll go in there for your listening to your music.
Cool.
Great sounding records, dude.
Thanks, man.
When we come back in, we're going to dig more into the recording and really get into some details, some nitty gritty. Are you using a Mac in your recording studio? Are you tired of feeling like the studio setup you worked so hard to create is becoming obsolete too quickly? Wouldn't it feel great to have a trusted friend to help you keep your existing Mac and studio setup current and relevant so that you can focus on the thing you love most, which is making great music? Well, now you can rely on OWC, Otherworld Computing, which you can find at OWC.com, whose mission it is to help you get the most mileage out of your existing Mac. Whether you need to upgrade your RAM, install an SSD drive, add more connectivity, or simply find a great used Mac that's ready to rock, OWC will help take your studio far into the future with a vast library of DIY install videos, 24/7 friendly support, and free shipping in the US on most items over $49. Why get frustrated and ditch your existing computer when you can take your studio far into the future with OWC? Learn more at OWC.com and find out how awesome your Mac can be at OWC. If you want to design and build a great house, then you're going to need great tools. You could build it with an old hammer and some nails, but it's a whole lot easier to use an air compressor and a nail gun. Well, the same thing goes for mixing. If you really want to create a pro-sounding mix, then it makes a lot of sense to start with a great toolbox of awesome plugins. This is where Boz Digital Labs comes in to help you get killer mixes easily, quickly, and creatively. Provocative will make your vocals sound lush and wide. Transgressor and Manic Compressor can help your drums leap out of the speakers. Gauge 80-weighty and Big Beautiful Door offer unique new ways to tighten up your tracks, while the Wall will make sure your mixes are in your face and competitive. And my favorite is Sasquatch Kick Machine, which can transform your kick drum from sounding like a home studio cardboard box into the perfect punchy kick without using samples or triggers. To download your unlimited trial of any plugin now or get one of Boz's free plugins, go to bozdigitallabs.com and put the best in your mixing toolbox. Click the link below in the show notes to learn more. If you want to capture every nuance of a great performance in your studio, then you need to start with a microphone that is crafted with great care and attention to detail. JZ Mics in Riga, Latvia designs amazing sounding microphones that are handcrafted with jeweler's precision to bring you incredible detail in your recordings. At the heart of JZ microphones is the unique Golden Drop capsule design, which uses a lighter, faster diaphragm that delivers great clarity and fidelity while avoiding distracting colorations and distortions. Make sure to check out the Black Hole series BH1S and BH2 with the awesome looking hole in the middle of the mic, combining innovative industrial design with meticulous electrical engineering to help your studio sound incredibly expensive for an affordable price. JZ offers a 5-year warranty, free shipping to the US, and 30-day money-back guarantee. Plus, for a limited time, if you use the coupon ROCKSTAR, you will get an astonishing 50% off. I got one. You're hearing my voice right now on the BH1S. So what are you waiting for, rock stars? Go to jzmic.com or click the link in the show notes below. Hey, rock stars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Brandon Bell, joining us here at the Toy Box Studio, and we're going to dig into some specifics because we like to. Brandon, you ready to jam, dude?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Tell us more about Southern Ground Studio, where you have been recording now for years. It's a beautiful location. What's there? What if we walked in? What do we see?
Yeah, so we've got 3 rooms there. Studio A is our large tracking room. It's got an API Legacy Plus, amazing mic locker, tons of outboard gear, 2 tape machines, plate reverbs, enough instruments to sink a ship. You could come in empty-handed and make a record in Studio A or C. That's kind of my favorite part.
But there's Studio A or Studio C?
Yeah. So
what happened to Studio B? Would you guys like fly it to the moon or something?
Studio B is our mix room. So it's not really a place you'd track a record necessarily. It does have a small overdub space. It works great for, guitar, vocal overdubs and that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. So it's a room where if you recorded everything with too many close mics, you go into the mix room to go make it sound like it was in the space again.
Yeah. So Studio C is our budget. It's kind of our budget room. It's a small tracking space. It's got 4 booths. Same kind of deal. We keep enough instruments over there that you can just walk in empty-handed and make a cool record. Killer drum set. So I think of what's in there now is a Slingerland Radio King that's pretty awesome and dialed in, and basses, guitars, acoustics, electrics, both. It's
cool,
pretty cool.
And A has the API Legacy console, so it's kind of a cool. I guess, was it a church once? Is that what the space was?
I mean, that's the history of the room is pretty impressive, and I mean, my favorite studios have all been places that were converted from something else. In most cases, churches. I just think there's something sonically and aesthetically there that's super cool. But yeah, the building was built in 1903. It was a Presbyterian church, Addison Avenue, Cumberland Presbyterian Church for about 60 years. And then Fred Foster bought it in 1968 and converted it to a studio for the first time. So under his ownership with Monument Records there, they recorded Chris Christopherson's first 4 records, a couple Tony Joe White records, and, some country legends. I mean, it's pretty amazing the history of the building and the artists that they've had in. But, Mel Tillis and Roger Miller all recorded a fair amount of stuff in there. All the Gatlin Brother records, and Larry Gatlin records. The Allman Brothers even did a record in there.
It has this kind of classic Nashville 70s country studio vibe. Well, I don't want to say just Nashville, because when I visited Sam Phillips recording, where Matt Rossbang is running it, there was a little bit of that same kind of use of space where you have drums might be in their own little, I want to say a booth, but it's not, it's less, how do I describe it? It's like if you walked into a restaurant, a Polynesian restaurant, and they had like fake rooftops coming down at you from the walls and stuff like that. That's the way the drum booth would be built, right? It's like this little room with a little roof in the bigger space.
Yeah, it's like a hut.
A hut.
We've got these little huts in the room that are our isolation booths. So there's a small one that we typically use for vocals or acoustic guitar, whatever. And then the larger one was originally built for drums. And it's kind of interesting, but it's kind of this octagonal booth, this hut that is the booth, and all of the windows used to go up and down. So they had motors that you could raise the windows up. So if you just wanted a little bit of isolation, you could put the drummer in there and then pull the windows up.
That's awesome.
And, he would still be kind of leaking into the room.
Old Cadillac powered window technology or something like that.
We should dig in there a little bit more, but the motors are still mounted in the walls. But we've, the glass long got replaced a long time ago.
I like the idea of just taking a car door and just installing it in a wall, just using the existing power window. Maybe
that'd be pretty amazing.
And then there were also like bleacher style tiers off to the side, right, where you could stand up on these additional platforms higher up.
Well, I'm not sure what the purpose was initially, but there is a little bit of a riser. It's almost like a stage in the tracking room. So there's another, what used to be the piano booth and is what we use as the drum booth. And there's we keep all of our keyboards up there, and it's kind of a cool spot and just nice to be able to break the space up in a, kind of vertically or whatever.
Yeah. I guess I always pictured these older recordings where you have like a chorus of voices that sing like behind Elvis or whatever, and they're just standing on these risers off to the side.
Right.
And then tell us about the cypress wood, because you guys have this beautiful natural wood all over the place.
It's Pecky cypress, and it's I guess it's illegal to harvest and sell now because it disrupts habitats too much to pull it out of the water. But it's cypress that's fallen down into the bayous and I guess laid underwater for hundreds of years maybe. But it's extremely soft. I mean, cypress in itself is soft, but this kind of takes it to another level. It's really soft, and it's really asymmetrical. Like tons of wormholes and weird angles, and it definitely attributes to the sound of the room in a cool way.
Can we think of stuff like this? Can we think of a soft, broken up wood as just sounding soft to a microphone? How do you? What's your experience about all these surfaces and sounds and stuff, and how to think about them in the recording?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it's like a microphone sounding soft, but the reflections of the room are softer. The room is kind of broken up to different, less harsh. I mean, the room is broken up into, there's some brick, there's some plaster, and then a lot of Pecky cypress. But yeah, it's definitely a softer reflection. And definitely with all the holes and the weird angles, it just kind of sprays it everywhere. So it's a really pleasing sounding effect, I think.
Yeah. Cool, man. All right. Well, let's talk about some of the ways that you record in that space. So there's a picture on the website of a band all kind of sitting around in a circle, playing acoustic, singing. I think it's the Zac Brown or Zac and
Zac Brown band. Yeah.
Talk about recording that way. What are some things that you enjoy about, assembling people in a space? Dumb questions like, does everybody get headphones? Do you do it without headphones? What does it mean that the microphones and the people are so close to each other? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's all kind of situational. Like for that picture exactly, I think that was the Jekyll and Hyde record maybe. And it was one of those spontaneous things where, we had set up for everybody to be isolated. Everybody had their own space to be completely isolated, basically. And there was something about this song that we just felt like, I think they were maybe rehearsing it in the room together. So why don't we just do it like this? Everybody just grab a spot. And I mean, there's 8 guys in the band. So we have 8 stations out around the floor. So it's already, there's a lot of stuff. Everybody's got their vaults of guitars and their pedal boards.
Somebody named Brandon has already put in a lot of work setting up this other way of recording, right?
Right. And, we recorded a couple songs that way and then decided to make a shift. And just for this one song, I think it ended up we might have gone into that configuration 2 or 3 times for that record.
All right, let's talk about that moment. So, because this is a special moment to you. So, band is in a circle. They're like, man, this is feeling great. Let's record this way. Engineer Brandon hears those words and goes, awesome, but then goes, wow. Like this is the moment. Everybody's ready to play the song right now and they're feeling it. How much work do you have to do in that moment? And how fast do you have to do it to get ready for, 8 people to record in a circle like that?
It's a little bit frantic because you don't want to, as an engineer, I don't think you ever want to stifle the creative process. So you're always trying to think ahead of everybody. So, when building out, anytime you do a setup sheet, I'm always thinking not necessarily of what could happen, but when I pick a mic, I want it to be something that's going to be versatile enough that whatever happens, and that thing's going to be able to come away with something decent.
Yeah.
So, in that moment, I'm scanning the room and thinking, okay, well, there's a U47 that we had up for, ukulele, and we've got the M49 that we had up for the potential for upright bass that probably wasn't going to happen, but here it is. And you just start grabbing all these things, knowing that you've probably got enough mic cable on what's in the booth to just drag it out and have it close by. So, all hands on deck, everybody's out grabbing mics while the band's still kind of working through stuff. And, headphones or not, kind of depends on the situation. Typically, I'm a huge fan of no headphones. I just think that's a way more natural way to record, especially if you're all in the room. That just makes sense.
If it's an acoustic performance in a circle, that's the way it's normally performed, right?
Yeah, right. And just as a player, that's how you hear yourself. You're not sitting around with headphones on all that. Most people aren't. So I just feel like that's so much more of a comfortable way to perform rather than hearing yourself in this really unnatural environment with headphones on your head. So I think in a lot of those cases, there was probably no headphones. I know for Sam Lewis's record, we didn't use headphones. I would put a little bit of vocal on a wedge for Derek Mixon to hear Sam's vocal on drums.
Now that's a record with a full band, drums, all that kind of stuff. So maybe we should talk about that. How do you set up for a full band sound where you also don't use headphones? Just
trying to position people, finding the balance where you're positioning people where you can kind of maximize their sound and you're trying to minimize the others on a certain level. I kind of like soloing through the mics just as we're getting going and getting levels on everybody and just checking bleed. And to me, it's just almost perfect when you kind of solo through and the level of bleed is about the same on everybody's mics. So nobody's overpowering anywhere. The hardest job in all of that is always going to be the drummer because they've got this amazing dynamic range where they can just, pulverize everybody in the room.
Loud.
Right. But then also this ability to play extremely soft and, and still have feel. And I just love any opportunity I get when there's a drummer that I can record who you can have a conversation over their playing in the room. Like it's pretty rare, unfortunately.
Oh, like the Bernard Purdy shuffle kind of thing?
Something like that. Yeah. Like Derek Mixon does it great. Chris Powell does it great. There's Taylor Powell does it great. There's a handful of guys in town that get to do it. I think that's probably more the thing. There's probably lots of guys that can.
So what you're describing is drums that are quiet enough that you can talk while the drumming is playing and hear yourself. So therefore they're pretty quiet. What are the things that happen to the drum set and the sound when you start playing at that volume, and what changes about the way you would record it or the mics that you would choose, that kind of thing?
The biggest thing for the drummer to me is whether they're playing quiet or loud is just as long as they're playing balanced. And it's even more difficult to play balanced really quiet because there's all this fine motor skills to keep that balance. Like I know one instance we recorded a thing for John Prine for a Spotify single, and Chris Powell was in the room sitting right across from John. And after we cut it, I knew he was playing quiet. I I knew how much gain I had on the pre's. I knew he was playing quiet. But then I started soloing things after the fact, and I heard more of John's vocal in the overhead than I heard drums in Prine's vocal.
Wow.
Which is just remarkable. You know,
and what kind of vocal mic might you have been using on John for something like that?
I think it was a U67.
Right, so pretty high gain condenser cardioid.
Yeah. And it was pretty tight. I mean, we're really trying to minimize any kind of bleed from other folks because we had electric guitar in the room and pedal steel and another acoustic guitar, I think. But, you know, I talked to Chris after. I just said, how on earth? And he kind of showed me a little bit, but I mean, he was hitting the drums with less weight than the stick falling on it. I mean, there was so much control in how he played, but because he did that, he didn't need any kind of reinforcement to hear what John was playing or what the upright bass player was playing, or, you know, everybody was balanced within their little space.
And that was a no headphone session.
Yeah.
Dig it. And then what about the distance apart between all these players for something like that? And so you're talking about drums, upright bass, John singing and playing guitar.
And a pedal steel or electric guitar player or something like that.
Right. So okay. So where would you position those people and those instruments for everybody to hear themselves?
I like, if you're doing no headphones, everybody really has to be close. You have to be within earshot of each other. Baffling is totally appropriate, you know, being able to put up a small baffle in between each person, and really thinking about your placement of those things to be most effective. But I mean, having people really close helps because the bleed isn't distant, so you're not going to hear any big slaps, or you're not hearing as much room as you would if you were, you know, trying to draw yourself all across the room.
You're not like blasting a sound out into the room to bounce off the walls.
Yeah.
Describe a small baffle.
A small baffle. That's a baffling question. You know, anything.
It's like a waffle with a B, right?
Yeah, right. Less delicious. You know, you can use anything, you know, thinking of like recording at home or just out at some random space. You know, if you've got a couch, you can drag a couch in between people, or, you know, couple sheets of plywood, or, you know, anything that has mass and weight to it is helpful. Definitely having something that's a little bit more absorptive is helpful. But I mean, the baffles that we use are typically about 6 to 8 inches deep, and they have a layer of absorption, like 703 insulation that's covered in fabric, and then mass, just dead weight in the middle. So it's probably,
so like almost like solid core door.
Yeah, solid core door would be great.
Like that.
You know, you can get mass load vinyl relatively inexpensively, and you know, if you're building your own, you could put a layer of that in there, and that really helps knock stuff down. A sheet of drywall is great at stopping sound. And then you kind of you sandwich it all together, so it starts out with absorption and kind of goes to mass, and then it ends up with absorption on the other side. So you kind of have a two-sided.
What do you cover it with?
Baffle.
A fabric or like a perforated board kind of thing? Or?
I typically go with a fabric approach. It seems to be the easiest and most effective.
And then
burlap
how tall?
whatever.
So you've got a bunch of musicians that are sitting down in a circle playing together. Are these baffles, you know, 6 feet tall?
No, trying to shoot for probably 3 to 4 feet. You know, you think about when you're sitting down in a
waist
chair,
height down to the ground kind of thing.
Yeah.
All right.
Just enough to kind of cover mic position.
That's the thing about building baffles is for a studio is just remembering, like, you know, do you want people in the studio to be able to see over these things and keep the eye contact?
Do you need to put
going?
A window in them if they're 6 feet tall?
Yeah. And then also like, or a window in them if they're 6 feet tall. Or if you can see over them and see somebody's face that you're playing with, can you also see their hand on the guitar strumming, you know? That's a lesson that I feel like I learned recently. What have you learned about line of sight for sessions, and what are some of the challenges that you have to run into and solutions that you come up with?
It's been an interesting thing seeing different people's setups at Southern Ground, because I'm not always the engineer on sessions there. And, you know, people setting things up in ways where maybe line of sight for some people isn't that great. Typically Nashville session players, they don't need to see anybody. I'm sure they really enjoy seeing each other and appreciate it, but they just have such a sense about what's happening. They know they anticipate other people's moves a little bit. I think there's just so much understanding about what's happening that maybe sidelines aren't as important as if you're recording just a band, like a rock band or just a group of people who play together all the time. Having a band in, I think they thrive on being able to see each other. That energy that they get from each other. You know, your a session on that level is different in that way, just because there's so much more. I think there is. Maybe I'm making it up.
No, it's all legit, man.
But I feel like there's a lot more of this. I'm playing on the edge of my ability, and we're all working together and trying to really push this thing to be the best it can. And being able to see each other and work off of each other's energy in that way is super helpful in the end product, you know?
So I was recently recording my own music with drums and bass in here. And I set myself up in the control room where I had great isolation. I could look through the glass and see them. They could see my face, but they couldn't see my hands. And some songs, that was working fine and we were getting a vibe for it. But what I realized as a takeaway later was that there were also some songs that were kind of like the pattern I was playing was kind of rock, like dun, 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 dun,
Mm-hmm.
Whatever.
Yeah.
And it's like in those instances, the bass and the guitar probably should just lock and play the same part, same rhythm. And I realized that by not making it so that we could see each other's hands, she couldn't see what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so it, and the headphones don't always clearly, at least not my headphones, show you. And also my funky wah guitar sound and stuff like that. So that was just an interesting takeaway for me. And, hearing you describe it with these great session players, they know what to expect of each other and maybe anticipate it. But in the band situation, maybe where there's music where like all the instruments should play the exact same strum pattern,
right?
Maybe sometimes seeing that the hand movement is super important.
Yeah, I think so. I think you nailed that.
Banjo, you've recorded a lot of banjo. How do you like to record banjo? And do we go for the joke that includes the dumpster or something? I don't know. What are some good instrument jokes that you've heard about recording? Have you heard any?
Man, I've
the
probably
banjo is something like you put it in a dumpster and record it from a mile away or something.
Yeah, I've probably forgotten more banjo jokes than I know. There's always the one about the guy, the banjo player somebody needs to help the banjo player. He's locked inside the van. You have to go unlock it for him, let him out. Yeah, using those carefully on a bluegrass session.
Yeah, right. I like the accordion joke. The accordion joke is about the accordion player who finishes a gig and then he's like real hungry and he goes and stops at Waffle House or something like that. And he's in there eating and it's late and he's like, all of a sudden he's like, oh crap, I forgot to, what is it like? I forgot to lock the car or something like that. And he runs out there and sure enough, somebody has broken in, or like he left his accordion in the back of the car. Sure enough, somebody has broken in and left a second accordion while he was eating.
Right.
I'm actually glad I actually remembered the punchline. I just started telling it, and I was like mid joke. I'm like, I don't really remember how to tell this joke.
Yeah.
All right. So banjo. So recording banjo. I mean, banjo is I love banjo. I'm a banjo player myself.
Cool.
But banjo can be a challenging instrument. It can be a loud instrument on a session, or even a quiet instrument, I guess, depending on which one you're playing. Where do you put the mic on a banjo? Which mics do you use? How do you record Steve Martin's banjo?
I think on Steve we used 582, which is a Neumann with I think we had a cardioid capsule, like an M70 or M40 or M94.
Of course you did, the 582. That's what I was going to say. We were all going to suggest the 582. No, I don't know anything about that.
The M582 is a sleeper mic, in my opinion. I think it's
not anymore. It's on Recording Studio Rockstars now.
They're fantastic sounding mics. They have a couple models have interchangeable capsules, so you can put an Omni, you can put a large diaphragm condenser on it. They've got different levels of brightness on their cardioid capsules, like the M94 is slightly brighter than M70. I'm pretty sure we probably had the 94 on Steve's banjo. I really like ribbons on banjos, and sometimes pairing two things, like having a ribbon and a 582 or some kind of open sounding condenser mic, and then just busting them to a track, making it one thing. You kind of get that guttural punch of the dynamic element, whether it's a dynamic or a ribbon kind of thing. And then with the condenser, you get all the bright, fast, transient things.
The pick on the
I feel like you get kind of the best of both worlds with that a little bit.
Are you recording Scruggs style with finger picks mostly, or are you also doing claw hammer style?
Thankfully, it's not a lot of the Scruggs thing. That really wears me out.
Really?
It's just there's so much attack and so much brightness about it. It's because of the finger picks, and it's extremely loud.
Yeah.
Especially with a condenser in front of it. There's a lot of claw hammer. I love gut string fretless banjo. It's one of the most soulful instruments I've ever heard. I mean, it's weird to think of it like that, but man, there's some folks like Dirk Powell playing a gut string fretless banjo is just super, super cool.
That's wild. Yeah, fretless. So you got to play it in tune.
I mean, it's not in tune anyway, right?
All right. So the dual miking thing, I love that lesson for miking, where it's like, instead of thinking you need to EQ it and compress it to sort of bring characters in and out of a sound, you've got these two different mics,
right?
And the blend of those allows you to sort of bring out the detail and the brightness.
I think I might have heard Jakir King doing that a fair amount, picking mics kind of as for their color and their sound, and then you make a balance of those mics and you just print it to one track. So you get a sound that you like from those mics without having to EQ and mangle things. And then you just commit it that way. And I love that approach. I think it's, shoot, if you need to EQ it still.
So now, if you're working on a beautiful API console, you can bring up a couple of faders, blend it. How do you send a blend from a console like that? Does it have busing built into it or something?
Yeah, so we're thankful. We're lucky with that API. It's a 24 bus console. So, we've got 24 buses that normal to Pro Tools, and then we've got another 24 direct outs than normal. So we've got a fair amount of flexibility in that. But I love kind of committing on that level as much as I can. There's so much cool stuff that happens in tracking that I want to capture. I want to be able to carry that energy along. Like we're digging these effects for whatever reason. We kind of dialed a few things in. Let's keep it, whether it's printing the effects separately or printing them onto the whatever tracks they belong to. I like bussing things down, and I don't know. I just want to
commit to a sound,
commit to it, and let's move on. I don't want to have to rebalance later.
Yeah, exactly. So what about the way that you're listening back to all this while you're working? Would a way to use a console like this API be to use it all for creating blends that get recorded into Pro Tools, and now you're just listening to the mix coming out of Pro Tools on two channels? Or do you like to break out Pro Tools back on faders and, kind of build a mix on the console while you're working?
I've almost convinced myself of going to the two fader return thing and just using the console as front end sending to Pro Tools or tape, whatever. But I just really like having the faders. I like busting stuff out. I print the mix the best I can. So however, my small faders are never at zero. They're all over the place because I don't want the organ I don't need it to be extremely loud on playback. And it's digital, so there's practically no noise and whatever. It's fine. If it's too loud and everybody's already adjusted to their headphones, I'll just pull it down to Pro Tools. But typically, I try to get the levels to go to tape the way I want to hear them coming back.
So it sounds like it's within the mix already.
So my monitor returns are all at zero. So even though it's all bussed out, I try to do stereo pairs so that my panning is in the box. So the idea being that at the end of the session, my rough mix is already done. So when the artist says, hey, can you rough mix that? I don't have to recreate anything. I pull it up, bust it all out 1 and 2, create a master bus and bounce it. And It's done. I'm so over having to, the engineer at the end of a already long day, having to stick around another hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, to print rough mixes of everything.
Right.
It's just been a way to make that whole process so much more efficient. And I feel like I'm leaving sessions with better better stuff.
Yeah.
Better.
It's funny how,
sounding
like,
recordings.
as an engineer, the process of going in and going like, oh, I'm going to mix this now,
Right.
is kind of fun because you start messing with stuff, but then it
Right.
kind of sucks because then later you're like, man, did I just screw this whole thing up, or did it actually get better than where it was before? You know?
Right. Yeah.
I guess that's just a challenge we'll be faced with forever. But so I've heard this idea presented many times of saying, leave your faders at 0 and record at the levels that put it in the right place for the mix already on the console. Do you ever give that same approach to within Pro Tools? So like, might your fader level in Pro Tools be still at 0? And if the tambourine needs to be quiet in the mix, you're actually recording it just really quietly to Pro Tools?
Typically I'm not super hardcore about it. Like I said, if it's a tracking thing and the organ was set at a certain level or tambourine was super loud, I'll just pull it down in Pro Tools because I don't want to. I'm always sending my mix to the headphones as one of the options, and then they have additive, more me kind of mixing on top of that. So I don't want to tweak my mix too much after everybody's kind of gotten adjusted. So I'll just pull it down in Pro Tools.
Yeah.
But typically I try to leave Pro Tools at 0, just in the event that session goes to somebody else, they can pull it up, bust it out 2 tracks, and it already sounds decent.
So the mix that you're creating that's going out to the band and the headphones, is that coming straight off the console before it goes into Pro Tools, or is that the return of Pro Tools?
That would be from the return.
Okay.
It would be it's on the API, it's all sending from the monitor side. And then I have additive so I can feed extra drums so I don't have to listen to a drum heavy mix, but they have plenty of drums in their headphones.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you find the musicians typically want more of in their headphones? You just sort of went around.
For the longest time, the biggest thing, everybody was always asking for more kick and snare, just for that reference point, just to make sure everybody heard where 1 and 2 was, or 1 and 3, whatever.
And is this with a session where the drums are isolated, or if they're in the same room, do people want that kind of stuff still?
Yeah, typically for both. Yeah. I mean, if people are recording live in the room, very few occasions where we'll have headphones anyways. In those cases, the drums are in the room and they probably hear enough without having to have it cranked in their headphones.
What about the drummer? Do you guys record with click tracks sometimes too? Yeah.
Click is a pretty common ask. Like most people are kind of asking for that.
Yeah. And then in my experience, the drummer always needs the most click boosted in the headphones.
Right. Having those, we've got the Aviom 16-channel headphone mixers, and that's been a really nice thing to have for a room our size, just so that everybody kind of can mix however they want. So there's enough space on the box to have multiple guitar setups. So if you're doing overdubs, there's space to go with it. You can kind of pile keys all into a stereo pair, vocals, bass, a perk overdub channel. And in that way, everybody kind of has all the flexibility. So the drummer can be cranking his click track, and then nobody else in the band really has to listen to it unless there's some kind of drop where the drummer's not actually playing and keeping time.
Right, and then you just leave a little bit in there so it's like this reference, but it's not loud. This show is sponsored by Recording Studio Rockstars Academy. Are you ready to take your recording, mixing, and mastering to the next level and make your best record ever? Then visit the Academy to find the course that's right for you. Want to record killer drums in your home studio? Then check out Rockstars of Drums to learn how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with a professional Nashville session drummer in a Grammy-winning studio. Or if you are ready to start mastering your own records at home, then check out Rockstars of Mastering, where I walk you through exactly how I mastered my own record, Skadoosh, using nothing but plugins in PreSonus Studio One. These techniques would work for you in whichever DAW you are using right now. And if mixing is your focus, then check out my free course, Mix Master Bundle, where I show you how to mix using stock and free plugins in Pro Tools. Plus, you get a look at how I recorded everything in my studio and multi-track downloads to mix in your own studio, and even include in your mixing portfolio if you want. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and look for the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. We talked about banjo. What about mandolin? What are some great ways to record mandolin?
It's not.
And did we mention that you've recorded Chris Thile?
I have. He's amazing. He's one of my favorite people.
Can you tell us who he is?
So Chris Thile is the premier mandolin player in the world right now, and has won the MacArthur Grant a few years ago, and he's now the host of Live from Here on NPR. He's the leader of the Punch Brothers, which is now a Grammy-winning band, and just a phenomenal musician and person. But he's writing classical concertos for mandolin, and God knows what he's doing. He's just a remarkable musician.
I seem to remember that there's a great documentary about him or about the Punch Brothers kind of discovering this new sound and touring the world.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's on Netflix. I'll have to look for that.
I'll have to check that out.
Okay, cool. So what have you learned about recording mandolin? What do we just take a 57 and just stick it out in the room somewhere?
If that's what you got. I like KM54 sound really great on mandolin. 64 sound great also. KM84 if you don't have the other two. 451 is a great option.
So these are all small diaphragm condenser mics, right?
Yeah. I've used U47s on mandolin and I really like the results. But if I had my pick, it'd be a 54.
What should we expect to hear differently if we choose a large diaphragm tube condenser versus a small diaphragm condenser?
I don't know. I have a hard time really noticing size difference, and I haven't really compared a whole lot, like in the moment of one or the other. To me, it's more of the EQ differences and how much of the room I'm hearing. What kind of rejection each thing has.
Yeah.
I find that most smaller condenser mics are slightly tighter sounding than large diaphragm mics. But
you get more of a high frequency pick.
Yeah, and slightly better at rejection on outside sounds outside of the pattern.
I think the thinking behind it too, or the physics behind it, is a small diaphragm condenser. The diaphragm itself can move more quickly,
right?
So it can respond more quickly to the transient sounds of a pick and stuff like that.
That makes more sense.
Whereas the large diaphragm is a little more sluggish, but it can also pick up maybe more of the, I don't know,
lower frequencies
and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I've really enjoyed KM54s on mandolin.
Okay, cool. Any other thoughts about compression or treatment of mandolin? Where do you pan it in the mix? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, typically in bluegrass, it's kind of down the middle. That's your snare drum. That's your backbeat. So that's kind of the bluegrass police will come chase you down if it's not in the middle.
Okay, that's great. I'm glad I asked that question. Let's go right down that path. What are the instruments in a bluegrass band, and where do they go in a mix?
Yeah, so
how does it all get added up?
Typically upright bass, banjo, mandolin, acoustic guitar, fiddle, and dobro would be a quick rundown of what you might have, or some variation of those. Bass and mandolin kind of down the middle, carrying the beat of the machine.
It's like the drum set of bluegrass.
Yeah, and then the banjo and the guitars are usually panned out opposite of each other, typically, not always. There's no rules. But panning those out from each other because they're more of the melodic and rhythmic instruments that are kind of acting as your hi-hats. And depending on, sometimes the drum or the guitar is more chord note information, and the banjo's more melodic or rhythmic or both. And then violin, dobro, kind of somewhere in between those things with the real melody and harmony parts of the tune.
Okay, so when you say in between, here we live in a world where people talk about left, center, right mixing, or LCRs, like hard panning for rock and roll. When we're doing acoustic stuff with maybe a bluegrass band, it's okay to pan stuff in the middle, not all the way to the left, not all the way to the right, and kind of spell it out the way you want.
Yeah, just trying to feel it out for the song, depending on how many words the singer's trying to sing and how many people are singing them. Sometimes if there's a lot of people singing a lot of words, it can kind of sound heavy.
Oh, do you sometimes record bluegrass bands that have drums in them too, or is it more?
Yeah,
common
occasionally.
to not have a drum kit?
That's not super common. Traditional bluegrass is really set kind of in their ways. They like to hear a certain thing, and kind of experimentation with outside instruments is probably not. It's kind of frowned upon, I guess.
Now, what about the vocals? On a bluegrass record, might the vocals be done afterwards as an overdub, or are they happening live with the instruments? And does that mean that the players who are playing these instruments are also needing a vocal mic and it gets the same panning as the instrument?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really say every time. It's all kind of circumstantial. Like the Punch Brothers' was it their first record? How to Grow a Woman from the Ground was the name of the record. And they recorded the whole record around 2 Telefunken 251s. That was it. That was spaced stereo pair, and they balanced each other within the room. And they moved in and out for solos and for vocals, and there was a choreography kind of that had to happen to mix the album as they tracked it. That would have been old school, a lot of really old bluegrass would have been around a mic. But now, most modern stuff, most people are tracking their vocals after the fact. So everybody fairly isolated and, going for lead vocals and then stacking harmonies. And in a lot of cases, probably doing harmonies one by one. The bluegrass records that I've worked on have been mostly artists doing their, everybody does their part individually.
Right. Yeah, I've run into that too, where it's like, oh, should we all go out on the mic together? And then a lot of times it's like, you know what, let's just break it out.
Right.
So we're going to end up there anyway.
Yeah.
And you get easier control on the levels and the balance and the tones and the pitch and the note, right? All right, cool. Fiddle. How do you like to record a fiddle?
I like Coles on fiddle sometimes. A KM64 can be really nice. It's similar to the 54, but it's a gold capsule. And
where does the mic go? Is the fiddle player sitting or standing a lot of times?
Most sitting and, probably recording about a foot off the fiddle, foot to 18 inches above. Right above, kind of right above where the bow runs across the strings, or favoring where the body meets the neck meets the body. That
which is almost like the 12th fret approach of an acoustic guitar. That idea. How often do you put a mic at the 12th fret for an acoustic and go like, that's the sound? I love that. And how do you figure out where to put the mic? Do you put headphones on and like listen to the mic in real time and find a sweet spot or anything like that?
I've kind of settled into a really extravagant setup that I don't always use, but it's really nice. And you can do it with any mics. You just need a system to be able to sum it or be okay with the fact that you've got 3 mics for one instrument. But it's kind of that idea we were talking about earlier of having, mics with different EQ or different sounds, and then being able to just blend them to what you need for the track. So having a ribbon element, a bright mic, and a mic with really good mid-range punch. And for me, that kind of factors into being like a Bayer Dynamic M160, a KM54 for the top, and a U47 for the mid-range punch. So the ribbon is carrying kind of the blunt force of it. Like, I just think of dynamics as having, like, they're not capturing the transients quite as fast as a condenser would. So it's just a little bit more blunt about the punch that it has. And it also has really great bottom end.
Right.
And then the other mics are kind of carrying the other thing. So if you need it to be bright in the track, you can push the 54 more. If you want it to be more mid-range, push the 47.
And do you sometimes push these mics, mid-mix, or do you tend to sort of find the right thing and then just commit to it?
They're occasionally they'll change within a song, but most of the time they stay put.
Yeah.
If it's a featured part of the song that needs to be kind of ridden, that could be something that changes, but typically they stay the same. The great thing about that setup is all mics are in one spot, and whether you're a session player or a novice, when you sit down to it, I think it's instinctual what you're playing to, rather than having a spaced pair that may not be configured in an obvious way.
Right.
When anybody sits down at that, they immediately understand that this is my focal point.
Right.
And for me in the control room, I know what those mics do, and I can get the blend that I need to out of it. So for me, instead of having to go out and move all those mics around, I make the player move. So I know what I'm hearing. If I want less bottom, I have them scoot a little bit more to their right, so the mics move a little bit closer to the 12th fret.
Right.
And if I need more bottom or mid-range punch out of the guitar, they can move a little bit to the left, so it's a little bit closer to the sound hole.
Right.
And if it's just too thumpy all around, I have them scoot back.
And what are some distances to those mics that tend to be
I probably
the right range?
Start at around a foot, typically.
So, I think a discovery for me, sometimes it's surprising, is that where a mic can sound best on an instrument is also where it can really pick up how bad the room sounds if the room doesn't sound so great.
Right.
So then you begin to learn that wow, you really do need a good sounding room.
Yeah.
If you got a great sounding space, you can pull back from the instrument more. What are some tricks you've learned when the room doesn't sound so great and you got to get closer to the instrument? What are some things you do to make sure that it still sounds cool to you and doesn't sound, wrong?
Trying to...
I guess the mic blend helps.
Yeah,
right there
the mic blend helps a little bit, being able to pull out bottom and get a little bit closer to the instrument maybe, and not having as much room. But if there's a way to quickly assess the room and throw a baffle in or something like that to kind of knock down some slap or a buildup of a note, if it's possible, that's always nice to have a couple baffles around that you can just lean against a wall for that very purpose. But it's always kind of a moving target a little bit.
Yeah. What about voice and acoustic guitar? What are some tricks that you use to be able to record both of those instruments at the same time?
I mean, ribbons are such great. They're such great tools for rejection like that, and having 2 figure eights where you can kind of use the null to null out the vocal while it's capturing the acoustic. And then, so you're pointing that mic directly at the voice, basically, and then the vocal mic is kind of completely aimed at nulling out the guitar.
So let's describe that a little bit more. So a pair of figure eights. So the figure eight rejects everything on the sides,
right,
and it picks up what's in front of it, and then I guess some of what's behind it.
Yeah.
Right. So if you aim the mic up towards the voice so that the side is pointed at the guitar, then it's rejecting the guitar.
Exactly.
That's what you're saying? Yeah.
And
so where do those mics go in that configuration? Is one up high near the voice and one down low near the guitar, or the mic's in sort of an unexpected spot?
I shoot for kind of like an ORTF almost configuration, where one is, just below the voice pointing down at the guitar, and the other is at the voice kind of aiming, toward the guitar that way. It kind of makes up somewhat of an ORTF. It's not quite XY because the mics aren't that close.
They're not right on top of each other.
But it probably ends up being, in most cases, a little bit wider than what our ROTF would be.
So that is, so the mics, the 2 figure eight mics might be 4 or 5 inches apart or something like that?
Yeah.
One 8, above the other or something?
Yeah, roughly.
Okay, cool. And is that for somebody who's standing and singing and playing, or somebody who's, I guess when you're singing, your voice gets closer to the guitar, doesn't it?
If you're sitting, it seems like everything is a little bit more compressed. When you're standing, that definitely widens out a bit. But I find that rejection to be so good that you could almost pitch the vocal after the fact. They're, depending on the singer, if they're balanced with their playing, it's almost that good of rejection that you can still tune.
And would you do that kind of figure eight, double figure eight rejection technique using ribbon mics primarily, or would that work with condensers sometimes?
It works with condensers. It's not as tight. The isolation isn't as good.
Because it's picking up too much of the sound bouncing back into
it's getting a lot more of the room than the ribbons are. It's a little bit brighter. You hear a little bit more of the phasing between the 2 mics than you do. Part of that's just the isolation that the ribbons are so good at. But condensers work great. And I mean, it really is remarkable the isolation you can get using 2 figure eights, even if they are condensers. But yeah, I mean, I love that setup. It works really well, and it allows you to still get kind of tight sounding stuff, and you don't hear the phasing quite as much as you would if you'd put up just two cardioids.
Okay, cool. I'm going to try that trick again. I haven't tried that in a long time. And it's such a great, it's a great concept for, rejecting the other instrument and trying to find that sweet blend. Do you sometimes have to flip the polarity on one of those mics?
I mean, occasionally just trying to figure out what the ribbons. It's almost in some cases it's so tight that you almost don't notice a difference in polarity
because they're not bleeding. If they're bleeding, then the polarity makes a big difference. Right?
Yeah. So that all depends on the vocalist being balanced with their instrument. So if somebody's singing really soft and playing really loud, it becomes a little bit different. It becomes difficult. So you end up with a lot more guitar in the vocal than you would otherwise. Yeah. But yeah, always check and phase between those two to make sure that they're in the right polarity if possible. Okay, cool.
Blackberry Smoke, 6 Ways to Sunday, has an awesome electric guitar sound in the intro. I don't know if you remember that specifically, but what are some of your favorite ways to get a great tone on an electric guitar recording?
Having a player that understands their instrument is paramount,
You wouldn't happen to be referring to Kenny Vaughan, would you? I know you did an amazing record for him, man. Talk about that.
Kenny knows exactly what he wants his guitar to do, that's for sure. And the Blackberry Smoke guy is the same. They all have they just understand their rig. They know when they push a certain way that the amp is going to respond a certain way. I mean, they have this incredible understanding of what's happening. And the ability to manipulate it and make it do what they want, which is kind of the most amazing part. So from a mic standpoint, I mean, everybody knows what a 57 sounds like on an electric guitar. It's kind of a go-to. I really like a Bayer M160 in addition to that, and I'll often put those two up and bust them together.
Would you put the mic's elements right next to each other for something like that?
Typically.
Now, where does it go on the amp? Do you mic the volume knob up on the top? Where do you put the mics?
Only when you want it loud. I almost always start in the middle of the cone.
Really, like dead center?
As close to it as possible, just because it's usually the brightest part of the amp, and it keeps me from having to add top. Sometimes if it's like a real chicken picking telly kind of tone, there's too much bite.
Right.
And it kind of gets thumpy in a really high-pitched, weird way.
Now, also, in all fairness and describing the context here, Rockstars, Brandon, you're not typically doing rock bands with all kinds of overdrive distortion and, rip your head off shredding tones where the amp needs to be listened to from 12 feet away to sound like the guitar sounds.
Right.
This is a little more intimate and controlled tone, right?
Yeah, you're getting a little bit of a pedal boost, maybe an overdrive, but most of what you're hearing is the tone of the amp and the guitar. There's not a lot of stuff typically in the path. So it's a lot of smaller amps. It's a lot of Princeton's, Tweed Deluxe, Blackface Deluxe. That's probably the biggest amp that I see in a lot of cases.
Blackface Deluxe.
Yeah,
I need to get one of those.
Yeah, they're so good. But yeah, I mean, I start at the center of the cone just for reference. So I know that that's kind of my brightest point that I don't need to add EQ. And then I'll move around the cone as needed. Usually once you get those two mics, close to each other right at the center, all you have to do is kind of push. With a small amp, it's easy to shove it over a little bit.
Right. That's the good takeaway is like, don't go move the mics, just scoot the amp a little bit to the side.
Yeah. That seems to be the quickest and easiest to make an adjustment rather than try to phase align your mics again. But yeah, I mean, and I mean, that's one of the biggest tonal changes you can do, more so than changing guitars or changing amps, is changing your mic placement on the speaker or changing speakers really has a huge effect on the outcome of the sound.
I'm always struck by, same thing, like moving it slightly, moving the mic, even if you're just doing, is easier if you're just doing a single 57,
right,
where you can listen to the guitar. now move the mic back a couple of inches and turn the gain up a little more. What does that sound like? Try all these different spots until you get something that kind of gets exciting. Maybe that's a little easier to do if you're recording yourself and you got all day to play around with it. If you're on a session, you guys are getting ready to rock, you got to probably have your sound up pretty quick.
Yeah, I think about it a lot, and I wonder, nothing against the way Nashville makes records. It's a preference. But, everybody's so dialed in to what they do. Like, everybody's kind of perfected their thing on a certain level. Like, all the players have this perfect rig that does its thing, and all the all the engineers kind of know their gear to a certain level that it's just all so dialed. You know what you're going to get. And because of that, it's like you don't get an hour to get sounds. It's like you get 30 minutes tops to get all your drum sounds, right? To get the whole band. Yeah. So it's really a matter of having a system that you really know and understand and are able to move extremely quick with.
Yeah.
So, when I get drums coming in, I kind of already know where EQ is going to land to a certain degree. So just cranking stuff before I hear a note of anything, just so when somebody comes in, sits down and plays, they can play groove for, 5 minutes and then they're done. You've got what you need.
That's quite different from doing the rock records that I've done, where we book an entire day just to get set up and get drum sounds.
Right. That's kind of a dream, I
don't know if it's a great dream or not. Grass is greener, depends on where you are.
Well, and it's not just drum sounds per se. I don't really want to do that. I don't know that I have patience for that, but just spending a day getting sounds and really experimenting with the overall tone of what your record's going to be.
Yeah.
Like, is that, on one level it feels like, right? Yeah, looking for a thing, but on one level you're starting the day and there's the pressure to get started, to be creating something. But on the other hand, to be able to spend that time, to have the luxury to spend that time and really craft where the rest of the time is going to go. I don't know. I think there's really something special in there that that music needs,
Yeah.
Spending that extra, it's not a lot of time in the grand scheme of things, but I think spending that little bit of extra time to explore something and try to find something a little different is extremely important.
Well, I remember hearing Jakir King talk about recording the Punch Brothers and them taking, a day of time or whatever amount of time it was to just explore different mic choices and combinations on these instruments and like come up with unique palette of colors for Chris Thile's mandolin before beginning, this like, okay, now we've got a thing that becomes part of that. And I've also experienced in doing rock band production where sometimes finding a new instrument amp combination, something like that, that'll kick off like days of inspiration and songwriting and recording. It's just you have this new palette of color that you can work with.
Yeah.
And I think that can be really cool too. And you don't need every color there is. All you have to do is a little bit of website design to realize just how impossible that becomes. Or try and choose a color for your house. And then they hand you that paint color palette at Home Depot or Sherwin-Williams, and you look at them just like, what the hell am I supposed to do with this? This is like a million colors. How am I supposed to choose one?
I think limitations in music is really important. I kind of recently went down the wormhole of trying to find a cool vocoder and, started reading, just as an example, but started reading all the forums of people nerding out on vocoders, which is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, but whatever. I went down that hole.
Did you get the original Roland?
Yeah. The whatever, VC 330. But I found this interesting article by Imogen Heap, and she was talking about that song Hide and Seek that she did that was all on the vocoder. And it like brought it all back into perspective almost immediately. But she just said Logic or Pro Tools, whatever her rig is, crapped out one day. And she felt like she had to do something. She had to be creative and produce something. So she looked around her room and she found this little kind of, I don't even know what it was, but it was like a Boss all-in-one workstation kind of thing that was still in the box, hadn't even opened it. And it happened to have a vocoder on it. And she created that song that day on that thing. It wasn't, she didn't seek out anything in particular. That was just what happened to be there and what was inspiring to her that day. And it's super cool. Like it or not, but I think it's really cool. But to me, it was like, it doesn't matter but having a limitation on some level, like she was limited to whatever was in the room. But she couldn't use her regular rig for whatever reason. So having that limitation created something else that was really cool.
Well, I dig the fact that here you are recording all these Americana and country records and stuff, and doing records with Zac Brown, and you're thinking about Imogen Heap and vocoder sounds. So it makes me want to ask you, like, what are some ways that you've been thinking about wanting to mangle sounds in the studio? How are you wanting to mess things up these days?
I don't know. I want to be, the part of mangling things is interesting to me because it forces me to be more active. You can do it with plugins. I just don't get it. It's hard to feel satisfied about that. And I feel like with plugins, you have this world of constantly tweaking, and you maybe never feel right about it. But with a hardware element, like printing a tape slap, there's something about that that's just immediately satisfying. I don't know if it's because the slap timing is familiar, but because we've heard it on other records, because it's a certain tape machine, or there's just something about it. You can put a tape delay plug-in on Pro Tools, and for whatever reason, it just never feels the same. I don't know what that is. It's weird, but I love it.
So you're talking about the benefit of using a real tape slap. So how do you set that up? Describe to the rock stars.
So I'll set up
from beginning to end how you actually make one of those.
So I'll just create an extra track in Pro Tools. I'll create a hardware send from Pro Tools, so it's going out to the tape machine. A hardware return from the tape machine to an input on Pro Tools that's now assigned to that new track that we just added. And then I'll set the tape machine. The tape machine that I use the most is the ATR102 because that's what we've got in the mixer room at Southern Ground. But setting it up, and the great thing about that machine is it has multiple tape speeds, so you can go all the way down to whatever 3 3/4 speed.
And vary speed too?
It doesn't do vary speed that I'm aware of, which I've been really trying to dig into.
So you can select some different speeds, but you can't just fine tune it to be in time with the track.
Yeah,
tempo.
That's kind of the most amazing thing about it, is that it's not likely to ever be perfectly in time as a slap. Which maybe that's what I love about it the most. But being able to change those things, and then sometimes being able to feed back from that channel the new channel that we're recording that's coming back from the tape machine. So we're feeding a vocal or instrument to the tape machine while it's on, it's recording that sound and then playing it back from the reproduction head. So you're getting that delay of the input to the output, basically. Right. So however far apart those heads are on the machine. And then it goes into the
tape speed. So if you do the slow 3.5 or 3 1/4 tape speed, it's taking even longer.
It's a really long, I forget the time, but it's a healthy delay.
And also, just thinking about it, 3 1/4 is, I think that's cassette speed.
I think you're right.
It's part of that cassette sound.
But it's 1/2-inch tape, so. But then you also have the flexibility of adding that same hardware send to the track you're recording to do a feedback loop. So it's the initial slap of the machine, but then you also have the slap part returning back to the machine. And the more you push, the more it feeds back on itself. So you start to get a delay tail out of it, which sometimes is cool and sometimes it's not. So being able to play with that as you're going, I like it because I'm out of the chair. I hate sitting in a chair and mixing. I really like being up and mobile. I like moving around and trying different stuff out, using guitar pedals on, inserts of things, just trying stuff, trying to see how I can push it and, just before it breaks.
Yeah.
That's kind of the goal in my opinion. I want to get to the point where it's too far and then just maybe pull it back just a touch.
So to describe the real analog tape delay again and the feedback loop. So Rockstars, you have a signal that goes to the tape, it records on the tape, delays a moment, plays back, comes back in on a new track, and then sends out again and records to the tape and then plays back. And it's doing that. So the first hit that goes to the tape and starts delaying might bounce through the tape and come back to you like 5 or 6 times if you have a pretty long feedback
really
loop. But the other cool thing is that I wanted to mention is that each time it does that, it kind of degrades a little bit. It's like doing a Xerox copy. We don't really have Xerox copies anymore of a copy and of a copy and of a copy, and it starts to like crumble and turn into this degraded thing. But that's part of what makes a analog tape delay sound so cool, is that you go.
Yeah, it's constantly kind of getting a little darker and a little bit more faint and a little bit more grainy, and it's just super cool.
Yeah, so just want to make sure everybody was aware of that.
Yeah.
Upright bass. What do you want to say about recording upright bass? We haven't even talked about that yet.
Always having a great player, a great instrument. I really always try to shoot for one mic just for phase issues, but sometimes you really, depending on the player and the type of material they're playing, sometimes you need an extra mic on the fretboard so that you hear the notes a little bit more. You're getting really great bottom from the bottom end, but then getting a little bit more articulation from higher up the fretboard. Or maybe not higher.
Well, what does the articulation sound like? Does it sound like click, clack, click of the strings being pressed down on the fretboard, or does it sound like the tone of the string?
If the player's playing cleanly, you're not going to hear the click, clack, clacketiness of the bass. Occasionally they sneak through because it's upright bass. But typically you're hearing the front of the note. Where the low frequencies, it's really hard to hear a note front because it's just this big wave, this big mass of sound. But that more high frequency stuff is, you're hearing the front of that note, so you know there's a defined beginning and end to each note,
and maybe a little bit of sustain of the note too.
Right,
and that is one of the things about upright bass that makes it so cool as an upright bass, is that it doesn't sustain like an electric bass does. It doesn't go boom. It's like boom. It's quick, right?
Yeah.
You like my upright bass?
It's really good.
Air bass, Rockstars. But I mean, that's always a thing for me, because like sometimes I've found myself wanting to record upright bass and I'm trying to force it to be more like an electric bass. And then later I'm like, wait a minute, I just killed the song and the mix and everything. It needs to go back to.
Well, and you end up pulling out all those noises, all the stuff that you're trying to avoid too. Is it's a big instrument and there's a lot of stuff around it, and you're standing by it, you might hear somebody's buttons on the back of it or whatever. The more you compress and draw all those artifacts out, you kind of got to be careful of that a little bit. But
you sort of
sometimes
messing
it's
up
fun.
the sound. Yeah. Okay, dig it. Do we talk about drums enough? Do you want to talk about how you like to record drums?
As minimally as possible. I don't like a whole lot of stuff. I don't want to deal with rooms after the fact if it doesn't need rooms. But I really love a mono overhead. Just for the punch. Get so much punch out of the snare and kick drum and toms with that the stereo thing. I don't know. There's a place for it, and I use it sometimes. But I really do just love a one or two or three mic thing.
Yeah,
I like overhead kick snare kind of thing.
Okay, so where would you put those three mics? Just describe that.
Kick drum out in front. I hate the sound of the inside of a kick drum for the kind of stuff I work on.
And does the kick drum have a front head on it with a hole in it or not?
Sometimes.
Sometimes
I'll point it kind of toward the center top of the head, kind of pointing down through as if I were kind of looking at the beater. Kind of using that. It's a cardioid mic, aiming it down a little bit to try to use the null on the back of the capsule, so I'm not getting as much of the ride and cymbal stuff. Mm-hmm. Maybe drape a blanket over it if I have to. But I really like the outside of the head, trying to position that mic so that I'm getting just enough attack from the inside and all the good bottom loveliness of it. I want to hear the tone of the whole instrument.
Right. What mic would be a good choice for a mic like that?
I love a D12, D20, something like that.
It's a dynamic mic.
It's dynamic, kind of old, somewhat fragile, I suppose. But they're not open. They're not bright mics. They're really, it's a pretty heavy roll off on the top, but they have this amazing amount of bottom end. Snare drum would be kind of your typical snare drum mic, and it's almost as a safety, just in case I needed it.
So some of the rock stars listening are going to hate that answer. Going to be like, "What is a typical snare drum mic?"
Right. So I'll put a 57 up, and I'll put it. Depending on the style of music, I'll either put it under the snare just to get the bottom, or I'll put it on the top. Mm-hmm. The bottom, it can be really cool just for that bright splat to support with what the overhead's getting. The
Right,
overhead's
so the
really
overhead's
low.
really kind of the top of the
Exactly.
I
The
like that you
overhead's
pointed
low.
that
It's
out.
like I go with like overhead, forehead height of the
so
drummer.
if the drummer leans forward, he's going to bump his head.
Exactly. I want to
her
be
head.
invasive.
Yeah.
I want the drummer to know that I'm there.
All right. So do you ever have the drummers like, yeah, I don't know. They do these big, like fake air drum fills. And you're like, dude, we're not going to do giant drum fills in this song.
I can't spin my sticks with this thing in the way. I try to be accommodating. I want them to be comfortable. I want them to feel like they can play and not worry about hitting stuff.
Yeah. Well, I like that, the concept of the forehead height mic is it's mimicking the head of the drummer, where the it's similar to what the drummer's hearing.
Yeah. It's going to be really close to where their ears are and what they're hearing.
Especially if it's a no headphone session.
Right.
The drummer's ears that's the definition of what this drum sound
that's how
like
he's
right
balancing himself.
Yeah.
I like that. The low tom, depending on the style of music, sometimes it needs an extra mic because the high tom is just naturally so much closer to the overhead. I really try to balance it so that the overhead is somewhat in between the two toms, but the high tom is almost always more full bodied.
Yeah, it seems to sing in that overhead mic a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes having the low tom not sing as much works fine for some styles of music. Sometimes it's just having it in there and riding it in the mix to make it speak a little bit better is enough. Certainly for a more dense Americana thing.
What's the mic that you enjoy putting on the low tom?
Anything. I like 421s the most. They're really great at rejecting and tight sounding. And they just kind of have a natural girth to them.
Natural girth. Awesome. Well, hey, we've been going for a long stretch here. Why don't we kind of wrap it up and close out? And I'm going to take you to our final question, and we'll go. This one will be hypothetical.
All right.
But we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine and go back in time. You're going to find young Brandon recording on his 4-track, and you say, "Young Brandon, I've come to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the recording studio yourself one day." What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could?
Man, I don't know. Hey, man, I don't know. The thing that I wished, the thing that I wished I knew, the two things that I wished I knew earlier on was the amount of time I spent lusting after gear was kind of wasted. Yeah. Like I really wished I had spent all that time just doing it, right? With whatever. Like the 4-track was amazing. But all the time we had the 4-track, it was like always trying to get to the Fostech digital thing or the Alesis 24-track digital thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's so much more about doing it and experiencing it and understanding that the energy about it is so much more important than having the right gear or whatever. I mean, it's really just doing it, figuring it out. I mean, you can make something sound cool with anything. Yeah, I mean, just got to do it. And that, I mean, to me, that would have been super helpful. I mean, I did it, just maybe not with the same veracity initially as I got into it.
Isn't that a dinosaur? The Veracosaurus? Awesome, man. Well, dude, thanks so much for being on Recording Studio Rockstars with us. Rockstars, again, I encourage you to check out the YouTube playlist in the show notes. And then I'm making a mental note to include the Spotify link there too, because Brandon's record discography sounds awesome. You're going to totally enjoy hearing all this stuff. And how can the Rockstars find you, learn more about you? Where should they, who are they supposed to email if they want to come into Nashville and need to make a hit record?
You can email booking at southerngroundnashville.com. That's a great spot to get in for Southern Ground. You can reach me there. I'm there pretty much all day, every day. And
except for here right now.
I don't know what's happening there right now. But yeah, I'm on Facebook. I'm the lone Instagram holdout, so I'm not there.
Nice.
But
Awesome.
but Southern Ground has a presence on Instagram and Facebook as well. So
and then the website for Southern Ground is southernground.com.
southerngroundnashville.com.
southerngroundnashville.com. Okay, cool. Well, again, dude, thanks so much. Rock stars, please check out the links in the show notes. And then if you happen to be listening to this on YouTube, make sure to hit subscribe and notification bell and the like button. And drop in a comment below too, and let us know what you think about recording acoustic music. Brandon, do you have any questions for the rock stars that you want them to drop in a comment about?
I don't know what cool techniques do they have for recording acoustic instruments or just getting weird? Like what inspires you to what I don't even know what the
like to like kind of we were talking about mangling earlier. You like to like mess up a cool acoustic.
Yeah, I want to know about all that stuff, like piano treatment. That's what I'm excited about.
We forgot to talk about piano. We'll talk about piano next time.
Yeah, right.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks so much, Rockstars. Thanks for listening. Brandon, we'll see you around the studio, dude.
Man, thanks for having me.
All right, cheers, man.
Kill 'em.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. Also, remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with these weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com. Look for the link in the show notes. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio, all totally free. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music.